start picking up on the second page of 11.1 notes in your class, talking about populations and samples. So our goal here is to distinguish between what a population is versus what a sample is. So by definition, a population is a set of all members of a group that you want to know something about. So the population is the big overall group. What are we talking about? Whereas a sample is a subset of the population that is being studied to answer a statistical question about the population. Okay, so a sample, it's a subset of the population. It is a piece or portion of the population that might be the group being surveyed. Okay, so population, the whole big group. What group are we referencing? The sample is a portion of that group, which usually we use a sample because it's easier to collect information on a smaller group. So you get a sample that represents the overall big population. Okay? Now, a lot of what we're doing on this page is basically trying to distinguish what is the population versus what is the sample. Okay? So let's look at these examples and get used to our vocabulary here. So example A school newspaper randomly selects 30 students from each grade level to participate in a survey to determine the opinions of students at the school. What is the relationship between the sophomores surveyed, all the students surveyed, and all the students at the school? Okay. Basically, it's saying what is the relationship, but basically we need to talk about what's the population, what's the sample. That's the basic, gist of what we're talking about here. Could be. Okay. So if they're talking about randomly selecting 30 students from each grade level to participate in this survey, okay, they're selecting a portion, right? What do those students represent? Our population is what the whole group represents, which is all the students at the school. Okay, so we're going to talk about population here. Population is all the students at the school. Okay, because that's what this data is about. Okay, it's about all the students at the school. Now, in terms of sample, what did they do? For the sample, they selected what? Okay, 30 students from each grade level. So when we talk about the sample, like the sample they selected is the 30 students from each grade level. So the sample is the students that they actually surveyed. Okay, now we talk about the sophomores surveyed, that is. Those sophomores are a part of what? They're a part of the sample. I don't know that, you could call them the entire sample if you're just focusing on what the sophomore results were. But they're also a part of, if we look at the 30 students from each grade level surveyed, they're a part of that bigger sample as well. Okay, so population, all the students surveyed, all the students at the school. The sample, I would say all the students surveyed. And then the sophomores could be considered the sample or part of the sample. So I'm going to write on here that sophomores are part of the sample. Okay. Okay, questions on that? Okay, well, let's look at B. A polling organization randomly chose eligible voters in the state of Indiana to ask who they would vote for in an upcoming election for governor to determine who will win the election. And then the question is, what is the sample in this scenario? And what is the population? Now, I realize they have A as sample and B as population. I don't care which we talk about first. I just want to talk about what's the sample and what's the population. So they randomly chose eligible voters in the state of Indiana to ask who they would vote for in an upcoming election for governor to determine who will win the election. Thoughts on either the population or the sample? Ian?
The sample would be the people who were randomly chosen.
Okay.
Would the population be all of the eligible voters?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and it's kind of a clue when they say they randomly chose the eligible voters, you know, the group they randomly chose. If you have a group they randomly chose, that's going to be your sample. Okay, so the voters that randomly got chosen to answer the question. And then the population is, okay, what does that randomly chosen group represent? Well, they represent all of the eligible voters in the state of Indiana. So on sample, I'm going to say the voters randomly chosen to answer the question. And then population, all eligible voters in Indiana. Okay, look ahead at the next one when you're ready. As you start looking at C, a city worker collects 5 vials of water from each of 10 randomly selected locations all over the city to test the levels of bacteria in the city water supply. And again, they're asking us for the sample in this experiment and the population.
Would the population be all of the possible locations?
More than that.
All over the city.
What do you mean?
It says, like,
Like all
of 10 randomly selected locations all over the city.
Would it be all of the vials?
Would it be 10 vials?
Well,
No.
there's 50 vials.
Now we're talking about population, right?
50. Where do you get
So
50
it would be
from?
just the city's water supply.
He took No, 5 it's the from each of location. the 10. There's 50 vials of water.
There's 10.
He took 5
From the
scoops
10.
from the 10 different spots.
I don't think we're worrying about
Yeah,
numbers
there's-
here.
There's 10 vials.
No, there's not. There's 5 vials
There's-
from each of the 10 spots.
Population's the city.
We're focusing
you
on
see
the
what I'm saying?
population.
No, I don't see
Okay.
what you're saying.
Okay, pause.
You understand me, Mrs.
Let
Sargent?
me pause.
I don't give
We'll get to that in a moment. Okay, so if we, the first discussion was about population, okay? Now, and the original population suggestion thrown out is the 10 selected locations. But keep in mind, it's 10 randomly selected locations. Are there more locations than just those 10? Yes. So when we're talking about the population, we're talking about, I think, Zach, did you say it? Just the city's water supply. Okay? The population in general is the city's entire water supply. had to get us away from the vials for a moment. We're going back, but I had to get us away from it because the vials are part of what we're getting ready to talk about. But just, okay, so now the city worker collects the 5 vials from each of 10 randomly selected locations. And they're trying to test the levels of bacteria in the city water supply. So population is the city's water supply. What about sample then? Okay. The 5 vials from 10 randomly selected locations.
5 each.
So 5 vials at each of the 10 randomly selected locations, which means a total of 50 vials.
Thomas, you're so smart.
Okay. So the idea that the 5 vials at each of the 10 locations, those go together to make the sample. Okay, because it's 10 randomly selected locations.
But I thought it was like 10 vials, and there's like, oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
So now, I'm open to how you write this. On mine, I wrote 5 times 10, which is the 50 vials of collected water. However, if you also wrote the 5 vials from each of the 10 locations, that works for me too. Okay? Are we good one way or the other here? Okay. I like the arguing, as long as it's productive arguing, right? You know,
At least we're
you're
getting
defending your reasoning, so. Okay, let's talk about Hannah. Suppose Hannah wants to find out the most commonly driven type of vehicle among the students at her high school. Since 1,560 students attend her high school, she asks every 10th student who enters the building one morning what kind of vehicle he or she drives. What is the sample in this scenario, and what is the population?
Population is the 1,560 students that attend. The cars on the students.
the high school drivers.
Okay. So, generally speaking, I'm going to go with the 1,560 students that attend our high school. I mean, I guess you could kind of say it's the cars of those, but who are we talking about surveying here? The people, right? The drivers, the people, So, for the population, it's basically for the population, it's the population of the high school.
Yeah.
That sounds, I can't say that. What did I say in here? The 1,560 students that attend her high school. Okay. That's how I have it written here. 1,560 students that attend her high school. And I guess I would kind of look at that a student goes with a car here. So, now, if that's the population,
In the sample, there's 156 students.
Every
It's 110.
The one. Oh.
now it's not just 156 random students. I see what you're saying. But it would be every
10th student.
10th student, right? Okay, which every 10th student, I get it, is going to be 156 students. But I'm going to go with the phrasing of she asks every 10th student who enters the building one morning. So it's every 10th student that she surveys. Okay, so or every 10th student that gets asked is what I have. Okay. So you're getting the idea about difference between population and sample, right? Population being the big picture. What group are we trying to gain information about? Sample being the smaller group of that big population that you're surveying to gain the information. Okay? Okay. backside of the notes. One less set of vocabulary words for this lesson. And I will say there is a lot of vocabulary in this chapter. But on the back, we're going to talk about what it means to be a parameter versus what it means to be a statistic. Okay? And I will say that as we talk about parameter versus statistic, it relates back to population versus sample. And I have my little shortcuts to remember here. So a parameter is a piece of information about a variable that is based on the entire population or a group of people or things that is being studied. So when we talk about a parameter is a piece of information that describes the population. Okay, so it's a piece of data, generally a number, describes the population. Whereas a statistic is a piece of information about a variable that is based on a sample or subgroup chosen from the population. So when we talk about a statistic, it's a piece of data, piece of information, that specifically refers to some sample, some subgroup. Now, my memory technique here is the P's go together, the S's go together. A parameter describes a population. A statistic describes a sample. Okay? Now, let's look at these. And again, it'll make sense as you put it all together. A high school has 3 lunch periods. In a randomly selected lunch period, 24% of the students brought lunch from home. So the quantity we're talking about is the 24%. Okay, that's the quantity in question here. Is that quantity a statistic where it describes a sample, or is it a parameter where it describes a population? Why statistic?
Because it's for a specific lunch period, not for a whole.
Okay. The population here would be all 3 lunch periods, right? This 24% is in a randomly selected lunch period. So in one of the lunch periods, that sample, 24% of the students brought lunch from home. So 24% just describes a sample because it's describing just one lunch period. Does that make sense? So for that reason, since it's talking about a sample, this is a statistic. Trying to think how I put it in my notes. 24% describes a sample. That was weird. A sample of the lunch periods. Okay. So that's a good example of a statistic. Okay, B, when you're ready. At the end of its first year of business, a movie theater collected data on how well its concession stand operated that year. The theater used its yearly total concession sales and number of tickets sold to calculate that the mean amount spent at concessions by a moviegoer was $8.14. Okay, so we want to know the quantity, which the quantity we're talking about here is the $8.14. Is that a statistic or is it a parameter? What do you think, Zach?
I think it's a parameter.
Because?
Because it's all of the moviegoers throughout the year.
Okay. Did it talk about doing a sample or a portion of their moviegoers? No. It talked about, it collected data. The theater used its total yearly concessions sales, and it was calculating the mean spent at concessions by a moviegoer, did it ever talk about just using part of the data? No, it talked about at the end of its first year of business, they used its total yearly concessions. So they used all the information, which means it is a parameter. Okay. The 814 is based on concessions of all moviegoers all year long. I don't know, I just have it based on all moviegoers, but it's based on all moviegoers. They didn't just pick certain dates, they didn't just pick certain movies. You know, they did everything. Okay. See? .2% of a district's eligible voters voted for the sitting U.S. House representative. What? Why?
Because it's including all of the eligible voters.
Okay.
I was thinking statistics because it's a district, it's not. I don't know.
I think it's statistic.
Yeah, that was
Because
statistics.
it's a percent of all.
I think it's both.
Yeah, it's a statistic because it says 53% of all district voters, or districts, all eligible voters.
I think
voted
it's
for sitting.
Because our.
Okay, let's stop.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm just gonna see it.
My turn before we
Yep.
just continue our. Okay.
Yep.
So, and I think what you have to understand is specific districts vote for specific House representatives. I think that may be, I don't know if that's going to help or confuse, but you don't vote for all representatives. You vote for the representative that represents you, that represents your district. Okay? So this is talking about 53% of that district's eligible voters. So this is a parameter. I'll just come out and say it, okay? It is a parameter because the population is all the eligible voters. And 53% of the eligible voters voted for this person. Okay? So because it's, I guess don't get hung up on the words districts. Okay? That'd be no different than saying of a state's eligible voters. Okay? Not everybody in the U.S. votes for every House representative. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I'm going to say parameter. And 53.2% is based on all eligible voters. D. The median age of a car in 20 randomly selected spaces in the school parking lot is 7 years.
I think it's a parameter. I'm not gonna lie. I think it's a parameter. Yeah, it's like,
Well, you guys have to defend.
Well, there's more than 20 cars in the parking
You switched over to blue, so that means statistic.
No, I just forgot to switch last time. I meant to switch last time, but I meant to switch every other color each time, and then I realized I didn't. So
yeah, now I think it is a statistic because you changed the color.
okay, now you guys make me want to erase C and write it in blue just because I meant for it to be blue, red, and okay.
I guess.
Here's the deal, guys. Median age of a car in 20 randomly selected spaces.
Random means it's statistic.
Randomly selected spaces means, is this everything? No, this is a portion. This is a sample. If it's coming from something that's randomly selected, that's a portion of the bigger population. So, the number we're talking about here is the 7 years, but that 7 years describes cars from randomly selected spots, right? So statistics, because it's based on randomly selected parking spaces.
So basically anything that says randomly selected.
That's definitely good. Now, I can't guarantee that's the only time you're going to see statistics, but those are definitely going, when you see something about a randomly selected group, it's definitely you're talking about a sample there.
Alright. And then every single one of those questions, I'm writing down statistic, no matter what. Wait, so we're gonna have like an actual like test over this stuff? Like a quiz and test?
Test definitely. I don't remember if I do a quiz in this chapter or not. I haven't thought that far
Yeah,
ahead.
this is like literally like easy, bro. Like, it isn't even-
Well, keep in mind, it is easy, but yet you have to have all the vocabulary sorted out. You have to know what's what. That's where it gets a little confusing. But okay, E. 40 randomly selected members of a high school music program were asked to report the number of hours they spend practicing each week. If you were to compute the mean number of hours, would your answer be a parameter or a statistic?
Statistic.
Why?
Because it is randomly selected members.
Okay. Are they surveying everybody? Or are they computing the mean number of hours for everybody? No, it's just 40 randomly selected members. So, statistic. Randomly selected members. Okay. Okay. That's it for our notes. You have some work time on homework. Okay. For those of you that will be here tomorrow, I haven't exactly decided what I'm doing tomorrow, but you will have some work time. Okay. But then homework is listed as due tomorrow. Okay, so make sure you get it done.